Hi, Misha here, and I have another British aircraft for you. And this is actually one of the reasons I started collecting British planes. The Fairey Swordfish. And I have two models here for you. I have a Corgi variant on floats. And I have a more standard Torpedo bomber variant on wheels from Atlas. Both are 1/72 scale diecast, but they're very different price points. The Atlas job here is around 25 bucks, and the Corgi these days is over 100. So I will talk a bit about, is the Corgi worth the money, or is the Atlas sufficient? The Swordfish, or as it was nicknamed, String Bag, gets the credit for the Allied aircraft that sunk the most enemy tonnage in all of World War II. It started off as an internal design at Fairey Aviation, known as the TSR. It first flew in March of 1933, and then the British Air Ministry kind of updated requirements, and so Fairey updated its design, known as the TSR Mark II, in 1934. And then this second prototype would first fly in April of that year. It would then be tested with floats on November 10th of 1934, and then tested by the Royal Navy throughout 1935. 3 more pre-production models would be ordered. The first would fly on December 31st of 1935, and it would be selected for Navy service, with the first ones delivered to the Navy in 1936 in February, and then an initial order for 68 would be placed, and the first squad was declared initially operational that summer. So what do we have here? From the outset, Fairey designed this to be a torpedo bomber, reconnaissance aircraft, scout aircraft, and patrol aircraft, and to be based on and over the ocean, so naval aircraft. It's quite large. It was about 35.5 feet long, had a wingspan of about 45.5 feet, had a crew of 3 initially: pilot, observer, and a radio operator. Its primary armament originally was one 1,760-pound aerial torpedo. It could also carry a 1,500-pound mine, sea mine, or 1,500 pounds in conventional bombs. When loaded up, its maximum speed was just 143 miles per hour, so it wasn't a speed demon, and its maximum altitude was little under 17,000 feet, keeping in mind we have an open cockpit. You didn't have a lot of guns for defense. It had one forward-facing fixed .303 machine gun, and it had one pivoting or flexible .303 machine gun, which would be operated by the rear guy, the radio guy. This was designed from the outset to operate from a vessel, and of course to be either equipped with floats or gear. Once it was put into Royal Navy service, it was actually the only torpedo bomber they had for a number of years. It wasn't joined by anything else until 1939. And proved to be a quite versatile aircraft. When World War II began, these were most commonly used as fleet defense and spotter aircraft, as well as convoy, escort, and protection. But then, on April 11th of 1940, off of the coast of Norway, the first torpedo attack from an aircraft of World War II would be conducted by a flight of Swordfish, when they would go after 2 enemy destroyers, having at least one confirmed direct hit. A short time later, one of these would make the first aircraft attack on a U-boat, sinking it, and kind of cementing this aircraft's place in the Royal Navy. While the technology used was nothing outstanding, it proved to be very much worthwhile. It is worth pointing out the observer's position was quickly found to be less than necessary on a lot of missions, so often his location was either replaced with an additional fuel tank or just additional supplies. He wasn't really needed. So a lot of times these would just fly with a crew of 2. And of course, its service in the Second World War was only just beginning. Early on, 1940, 1941, the Swordfish was all about its torpedo. That was its primary weapon and what it was primarily used for, attacking ships. But it was also used to attack some coastal installations on the ground, on land. Coastal Command would sometimes do these runs. In June, they would start deploying Swordfish against the Italians. They would attack vessels at sea. They would also start attacking airports, airfields, supplies, oil fields, and they would start flying at night as well as day. Interestingly, on July 3rd, Swordfish were used to attack the French fleet off of Algeria under the control of the Vichy government and damage the battleship Dunkirk. And we're continued to be used as anti-shipping aircraft. Now, on November 11th, a flight at night were sent against the Italian fleet at port, and they successfully damaged 3 battleships and 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers, as well as other smaller vessels. This was important not only because it was a pretty good attack against Italy, but for who was there. The assistant naval attaché to Berlin from Japan was there and took note of the use of torpedo bombers against a fleet at port. And you definitely can see where that's going. Moving into 1941, swordfish were sent against targets inland in Iraq and the Axis-controlled Middle East at the time. But then, of course, on May 24th is when these would have their biggest note in history. 9 would be sent against the German battleship Bismarck in rather poor weather conditions, and actually succeeded in making a few hits, doing minor damage but stalling the ship. Then on the 26th, they would be sent against it again, hitting the ship multiple times, still not doing significant damage, but they were able to jam the ship's rudder, causing it to not be able to veer off, which made it a much easier, more vulnerable target for the Royal Navy once they caught up to the crippled warship. It's interesting, this plane was flying so low and slow that the German gunners, with their new fancy assisted guns on the Bismarck, had a hard time getting a bead on the old-fashioned swordfish. And that was kind of the highlight of its career. Later in 1941, newer, more capable torpedo planes were coming into use. So beginning in October of that year, these started to be fitted with radar. In fact, this was the first carrier-based aircraft in the Royal Navy to have the ability to find targets at night and or in bad weather. They had early versions of the ASV radar, also used on the Sunderland, at least a variation of. And it really took a large aircraft. This was about as small as you could get early on and still have that radar. So these started to be fitted out more as anti-submarine, either for detection of U-boats or detection and destruction. And a swordfish would get its first nighttime kill of a U-boat that December, and would continue to do so throughout the war, sinking a total of 14. In 1943, the Mark I would be replaced in production by the Mark II, which had the more capable ASV Mark II radar. It also had its lower wing reinforced with metal so it could carry and launch rockets, and these were mostly used against submarines. The Mark II would be the most produced version. There would be a Mark III, which would have an even more advanced radar. The Mark III Swordfish, by the way. It would be the ASV Mark 11. This was a larger unit that actually was mounted where the torpedo would have gone, meaning at this point they're mostly used for detection rather than direct attack at the end of the war. They were also used increasingly for training, as well as, of course, just regular patrol spotting. It's also worth pointing out that in 1940, Fairey discovered that it really didn't have enough production capability to keep meeting the needs of the Navy. So by 1941, Fairey's manufacturing was kind of supplanted by Blackburn. In fact, Fairey would make just under 700 Swordfish. Blackburn would make the majority, nearly 1,700, and of those, 1,100 or so were of the Mark II design. But yeah, later on in the war, this was mostly known as a submarine killer, and was increasingly outfitted as such. Production would finally end in August of 1944, like I said, with just under 2,400 made. And they would continue to serve in the front line, even though they were quite obsolescent by 1945. But they would still be used. In fact, their last anti-shipping missions were in the spring of that year off of Norway, kind of fitting since that's where they more or less began, at least in their combat roles. And then right after the war ended, the Swordfish was officially declared obsolete on May 21st of 1945 and retired out of active combat in the Royal Navy. They would be kept on for about another year as training aircraft, but even then they were kind of retired from training duties in 1946 because, the jet was coming in and this just wasn't really even worth it on that score. I probably will talk about the battle for the Bismarck in a separate video, because it's definitely an interesting event in the Swordfish's highlight, in a way. It's quite likely that without the Swordfish, the Bismarck would have not been successfully sunk, but who knows. What about the models? With the Corgi being quite a bit more expensive. Well, since this plane has a fixed undercarriage, there's no wheels up or down, it's always going to be down. In fact, this doesn't even have wheels. It does have a rotating propeller. But no torpedo under the belly. Mostly just because of the variant that this is. It does have crew figures. They're not, I'm sure you could pull them out, but they're not meant to be removable for what that's worth. It's a relatively light plane for being Corgi in its size. The fuselage is metal, but the wings are mostly plastic and it has nice rigging. They also did a wheeled version. What about the Atlas? Well, we don't have any crew, which is common. They typically don't. We just have the seats here. We don't have the rigging near as much under the wings. We do have a torpedo though, which is kind of nice. And we have a propeller that does not move, which is common for your earlier Atlas models. And yeah, nothing really moves on this. And it is an even lighter model. The body is metal, but the wings and everything actually, I think the bottom wing is metal. The top wing, I believe, is plastic. And the wheels don't rotate, for what that is worth. And it comes with a basic stand. The Corgi one, the one that does have the wheels, they do rotate, and it does have one neat feature. See if I can do this one-handed. The wings fold. Come on. Sometimes I wish I had 3 hands. Make my life a lot easier. I'm going to set you down for just a minute, guys. I don't want to risk breaking a model. You can see it likes to dip back. I'm just going to take it off its stand. Yeah, once you fold the wings, because they do have some metal content in them, it tends to dip back on its stand a little bit, because it's just a pretty simple, peg, and it likes to go back. I've never had it fall, but I don't want to risk it. So, I'll take them both out their stand. But yeah, this would have been how it would have been stored on board a ship. Hopefully with the crew not still in it when it was all compacted up for the flight deck, huh? But pretty neat, if you ask me. I wish more models had folding wings. This kind of makes them a little more distinctive. It means you can display it a few different ways. So, is this one worth the extra money? Depends. The Atlas, for the money, is not bad. Pretty decent detail. Even though it's relatively light, you do get the torpedo, you get the guns. So for just a model sitting on the shelf, it's fine. But the Corgi has the full rigging. You can get it with the pontoons. We have crew figure. And it has the articulating wings. And it is a heavier model. And comes with a slightly nicer looking stand. And most importantly, has a rotating propeller. I never did like the ones where the propellers were fixed. That just, I don't know. Seems like the propeller should move. Just my opinion. So I would say if you're just a casual collector, just want a representative piece for the collection, the Atlas is fine. But if you're a more serious model person, the Corgi is definitively better in every objective way. So the only downside to the Corgi is just the price. But this is one of their best models. They always do well with their British. Not surprising considering it's Corgi. Alrighty, folks. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And if you like British aircraft, you might check out the playlist, because I have quite a few others. With that said, I want to turn in for the night. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.